Good evening. My name is John Mazzara. I'm with Remax Results in the Twin Cities, and today we're gonna cover is buying an investment property and selecting the right type of property that might work for you. So, what are your choices? You could choose a single-family home, you could choose a condo or townhouse, you could choose a duplex, triplex, fourplex, or even an apartment building. So, for most people just starting out, I'm going to recommend that you start small and you can always scale up if you find that investing in real estate is something that you enjoy. On the other hand, if you buy something very large, like let's say an apartment building, it's going to be harder for you to sell because there will be fewer buyers potentially in the marketplace. And an apartment isn't, it's much bigger and it's much more complicated. So let's start small. Let's start where you have the best chance of success and where I think you'll find that it's scalable. So with that thought in mind, then let's narrow it down to houses, condos, townhouses, and or duplex, triplex, or fourplex. Now, when I first got started, one of the first things that I purchased was a duplex. And I went on to buy three of them with another individual and his wife over the course of a couple of years before we disbanded that partnership. Later, I bought houses, I bought land, I moved houses onto land as I did a house move one time. So I've kind of done a little bit of it all. But right now, my preference is condos and townhouses. And here's why. With a condo or townhouse, you don't have to worry about a lot of the things that you would normally have to worry about with a house. So, what do I mean by that? Garbage, for example, taking care of sidewalks or removing snow, maintaining it. With a house, if you own a house, you'll know there's lots of things that require maintenance. And I call them various degrees of obsolescence. Could be the roof, could be the siding, could be the plumbing, the mechanicals, all sorts of things. And those are what I call money bombs. What is a money bomb? A money bomb is where you have to improve it or replace it and it doesn't add any direct value. So if you spend $5,000 on a new furnace, you did not add $5,000 of value to that home because every home must have a furnace. The fact that it's new and brand new may have added $500, $1,000, but there's certainly no one-on-one correlation. It's not like other improvements where you might, let's say, redo a bathroom or redo a kitchen, which might add dollar for dollar value or even more. Those are, of course, areas where you could and want to make improvements because you're going to get a much higher return. But money bombs, you don't get any return for. But if you don't have them, if you don't have a working furnace, if you don't have a roof that's functional, for example, well, then what's going to happen? You're going to have that cost of that replacement item deducted. So with a condo or townhouse, you're paying an association fee. And the nice thing about an association fee, even though you might not like paying that $200 to $400 a month, is that that is providing, generally speaking, a sinking fund that's providing for the replacement of those items. So when that roof needs to be replaced or the siding or the driveway, that's all being funded for in advance on a sinking scale through that association fee. So if there's an assessment to you in the future, it's likely to be a smaller amount than the full cost of that replacement. Everything would be divided, of course, proportionally based on the number of homeowners or owners within that unit. So the fact that there's a sinking fund is one nice feature. The other thing is that most condos and townhouses, at least in the Twin Cities here, are not 50 years old. Whereas, I mean, there are some that are 50 years old, but most of them are, let's say, 20 to 30 years old. Whereas if you go with houses, and if you're going to buy them affordably, you're going to buy them, let's say, 250,000 or less. That's going to put you probably either very far out of the Twin Cities or within the city itself. And within the city itself, you're going to have homes that were built in the 1800s. So they are all going to have various degrees of obsolescence based on functionality, like smaller closets, smaller, ceilings, and those types of things. In addition to all of the money bombs that are at various different stages. So the roof might be 20 years old, the siding might be 50 years old, the appliances might be 30 years old, so on and so forth. But with a condo or townhouse, if they're not that old, everything isn't then that old. And so they still have functional life left. And as we've changed in society, we've moved more towards larger closets because we have more stuff. We've moved towards vaulted ceilings and other things that make a newer property, more desirable than, let's say, an older property. So my investors that have bought houses oftentimes will complain that they don't want to have to go over or hound the tenant to do the yard or to shovel the sidewalk. Let's say if they buy something in the city, because ultimately what happens on that property is the responsibility of the owner. So even if your lease says that the tenant's going to do those things, if the tenant doesn't and the city finds you, or somebody gets hurt like slips and falls, it's going to be on you, not the tenant. And if you say, well, you're going to make the tenant responsible, they're probably a tenant because they don't have the money to be an owner in the first place, and hence they're going to come after you anyway. So I think there's some liability reduction in buying a condo or townhouse because there's a master hazard insurance policy with liability, and they're in charge of taking care of all of those things on the exterior. What then becomes your responsibility is finding a good tenant. So if you buy into a condo or townhouse that allows for rentals, not all of them do, but if you buy into, and that's why we of course would never buy into one that didn't, if that was your intent to use it as a rental or to use it as a rental in the future, we would want to double check that before we even viewed the property. And I do that for my clients by placing a phone call to the association and asking them the current status. Now, I say current status because the one risk with buying condos and townhouses that you don't have with the house is that the association by quorum can change the rules and regs that you originally bought under. So let's say there's another landlord in the project, and they've acted very irresponsibly. They put in somebody that, or some people that caused lots of problems. If that was the case, they may retaliate and say no more rentals. And if they get enough votes, they may prohibit you from continuing to rent your unit after your tenant's current tenancy. So that means you may have to sell when you don't want to or move into it. And if the market isn't cooperating, meaning if we're in a down market, nothing goes up forever. So if we're in a different market, then you may have to sell at an inopportune time. That could happen. So it isn't without risk when you're investing in anything. But that's the one risk with condos and townhouses. Now, I have not seen that happen a lot, but I know of a case where it did happen, and I know personally where they tried to do it on one of my condos and townhouses at one of the projects, and we successfully beat that back. We hired an attorney and organized, and refused the attempt that this one individual was making to ban it. And kind of poetic justice, she ultimately got foreclosed out of the property anyway. So she was a troublemaker and had to go. This was back in the mid 2000s when we had the recession and the foreclosure crisis. So anyway, back to selection then. A condo or townhouse too, they're typically smaller. They might be 800, 1,500 square feet. They're generally much bigger than that when you're buying them at around 200, let's say 250,000 and below. And the nice thing about being smaller as a unit is that fewer people can occupy them. So you won't have multiple families, 6 people jamming into a 2-bedroom townhouse, typically, just based on the functionality of the size. Whereas if you buy a single family home, it could attract multiple tenants, and that may or may not be good for you. It could violate the unrelated party rule, meaning some cities have rules on how many unrelated people can live in a house at any given time. Minneapolis has that, Mankato has that. Other cities may institute that, which may prevent you from buying a property if that's your intent. For example, I had a client that wanted to buy a home in Mankato, and Mankato is split into different zoning into different parts of the town. And they have, in this part of the town that he was looking at, it had a 2 unrelated party rule, which means he couldn't put his son in with 2 roommates in a 3-bedroom house. It could be a son and 1 roommate. Well, maybe the math didn't work like he had hoped because he had 1 less person paying rent. So you want to always know the rules. Once you decide on the property, you always want to know the rules of that respective city, and in advance before you buy, not after you buy. This individual wanted me to take him and show him his property at Mankato, and I called Mankato and researched the rules, and then I told him, and then he was like, "Oh, I didn't know." So those are things, again, that you want to do. I'll help you, but you want to do those on your own. I always like to say, trust but verify. So when I call an association and verify, for example, that they do allow rentals, you will have 10 days to review and accept the rules, regulations, bylaws, and financials associated with any condo or townhouse that you purchase. It's state law. It's a form that goes with the purchase agreement. Your 10 days start when you receive those documents. In the event that you find out that they don't allow rentals, for example, because you read the documents, then unless there was an amendment changing it, you'll be able to cancel that contract and then back out and receive all of your money back. So that's the due diligence time period, but rather than have you buy something and back out, I always do it for you or help you with it up front. And then I always say, double check me, call or read the documents. Of course, that's why you have that 10 days. Check with the city, make sure that you understand the rules that you'll have to live under. Now, Minneapolis, for example, is a city that makes up different rules all the time that are different than all of the other cities, and St. Paul tends to follow suit. So know that if you buy in Minneapolis or St. Paul, there'll be a different set of landlording rules that will be an overlay over, let's say, the state legislation rules. Our Attorney General office provides a great resource. So if you go to the Minnesota Attorney General's website and you download the publication Landlords and Tenants booklet, you'll have all the statutes available to you. These cities sometimes will put additional overlays over those rules. So just because you might own a property for rent, let's say in Edina or Bloomington, and you see something in Minneapolis, don't assume that you'll be able to operate your business the same way in that city, because you won't. Same with the rules, regs, and bylaws of the condos and townhouses. Most of them require that you have a 1-year lease. They don't want to have you have an Airbnb. They don't want to have you have, like a hotel of any sort. So you can rent. Some of them are requiring that you have done a criminal credit background check, which I would encourage you to do regardless. But they're requiring that you do that and submit some form of proof and or a crime-free addendum. So there are different rules in the cities, and of course, nobody wants you to be irresponsible and move in somebody that's going to create, a bad environment for the group. So that's how they're trying to police that, is making sure that you do your job as a landlord and act responsibly up front. So again, just to kind of recap, condo townhouse, a lot of the things that you would have to worry about, you don't, because the association's taking care of it in comparison to a house or a duplex, triplex, or fourplex. So it removes some of that management responsibility from you. And that allows it to be more scalable. I have a client that owns about 17 condos or townhouses. He bought them at the right time. He bought them at 50 cents on the dollar. During the recession, he had the ability to get financing, and he did. And he quit his job and now just manages his rentals. Prior to the two of us meeting and working together, he owned single family homes, and it was not pleasurable because he was always getting called to go do something. Now that he owns condos and townhouses, he was able to scale much more rapidly and maintain that level of rental property because there's less work for him. When a tenant moves out, he'll do painting, he'll do carpet cleaning, but all the other areas of obsolescence, and especially the big ticket expensive items, are covered by the association. Roofs, siding, driveways, sidewalks, landscaping, all the exterior is covered, generally speaking, by the association. Now, when I first started buying properties, I bought duplexes. It was back in, I think I bought them in 1990. I started selling homes back in 1986, so it could have been 1988 too. I can't really remember. But it was 1986 they changed the tax laws, and so they used to be able to have accelerated depreciation schedules, and you could write off all of your income with rental real estate. Then they took that away. they changed the tax code, and then a lot of people that bought real estate simply because they wanted to depreciate it and not be a landlord but didn't want to pay taxes now had to decide if they wanted to be a landlord for the purposes of being a landlord. Many people didn't. So there was a slight recession in approximately 1989 to 91, was the S&L crisis, savings and loans crisis, and it was sort of like the mini recession. Or not, that was like a mini recession and compared to the big recession that we had in 2008, 9, and 10. But real estate does go through cycles, and that was a time that it did happen before. And so real estate was a don't wanter, and duplexes and all multifamily properties were being dumped by people that have purchased them solely based on the tax benefits that were no longer existent. So duplexes were a nice way back then. You could actually buy them based on, at approximately $100,000 and get the rent for $1,000 next door, and that would cover your mortgage payment. So many of my buddies right out of college, I sold duplexes to. They moved into one side, had somebody else pay the rent, and lived effectively for free. And then used that money to save, buy another property, take a trip, buy a truck, whatever they wanted to do. So buying an owner occupying a duplex used to be a fantastic idea, especially when people weren't wanting duplexes. Well, let's fast forward to today. Today, people look at it the same way. Now they don't get to live for free, but they might live for a few $100s. So I have clients today that are spending $350,000 for their duplexes, and with interest rates at the current moment being in the 2s and 3s, they're effectively able to live for $500-600 a month as their tenants pay them $1,500. I would say $1,200 to, let's call it $1,200 to $1,700. Depends on the duplex, of course, but for very little money, they're able to live in their duplex, and it's a great way again to build wealth. So owner occupying a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, I think makes a lot of sense in the right situation. Now, typically in the Twin Cities here, that's going to mean Minneapolis or St. Paul. There are multifamily properties in other cities, but very limited. So you'll find some in Richfield, Bloomington, Robbinsdale, Crystal, a lot of the first tier suburbs around Minneapolis and St. Paul. However, there just aren't that many. So really where they're concentrated and where they were built were in the core cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So that's, if you don't want to live there, then that idea might not work for you. But if you want to live in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and you want to live and own your first investment property with high leverage, because you could actually buy with as little as 3 or 3.5% down if you live in it, then I would encourage you to take a look at owner occupying a duplex. Although you will still have the same degrees of obsolescence. Now, Minneapolis has something unique called the 2040 plan. And so what they did about a year ago is they went and rezoned the entire city of Minneapolis, where residential lots are now zoned for up to a triplex. So that means you could buy a single family lot, you could tear down a house, and if there's rules, meaning you have to have a certain level of coverage that you can't cover the whole lot with the property. There's percentage of coverage, and then there's rules on height, and there's a little formula that you have to follow if you design one. But you could add an accessory unit in the back if you have space on your lot. You could convert that garage hypothetically into another unit. You could add to your home, or you could tear down, start, and build new. So there are some opportunities throughout Minneapolis for infill lots where that could be done. So that is interesting. It's something that I'm exploring personally for myself, and it's something I could help you with as well. I'm not going to own or occupy it. I'm going to be using it as an investment property. And I'm just in the process now of my architect coming up with some ideas that I'm going to be bidding it out and then building it. I think I'm going to be able to make the numbers work, but I guess I won't know until I get the bid from the contractors on if I'm actually going to build it or just sell the lot or build a single family spec home and sell that. I'm just not sure, but I personally own a lot, and that's one of the things that I'm going to be exploring. So if you do that, everything you want to do is based on the math, right? So we can hypothetically go out and look at what's available and what we think we can rent it for, and then we can look on a backwards basis what we would be able to get for a rate of return if we're able to achieve that rent. And that's something I'm able to help you with. It's called an APOD, or Annual Property Operating Data Analysis. We're making guesstimations, of course, based on what we can achieve for rent, and I can show you how we do that research. We'll do that in another episode here. I'm going to do, I think it's 6 or 7 episodes of various aspects from this class that I teach. And so today we're just talking about selection. But we would always want to buy something, generally speaking, that carried itself. However, if you think the appreciation rate is going to be greater than the cost of carry, so if you had negative $200 a month cash flow, times 12 is $2,400, but it's going to appreciate, let's say at 10%, you bought it for 200. Well, that's 220,000 the next year, and then the next year it's 222.2, or now it's up to 240. So you may sometimes go into a rental property based on the appreciation rate, and again, nothing's guaranteed, and we always have to look backwards to know if we made the right decision. But sometimes people will stretch up by a little more expensive property if they can afford to cover the negative cash flow, if the appreciation rate is likely to outpace that negative cash flow. So there's different ways to look at a property. Typically, you're looking at it from a cash flow perspective as you're comparing buying real estate in comparison to another investment, meaning the stock market or bonds or gold, silver, whatever, crypto, whatever you're into. And so this is an investment that you look at in comparison to the others, and possibly simply for diversification, and because you think that it's going to have a good rate of return. You're not buying it, obviously, to lose money. As I mentioned earlier, I think you should start small. What I mean by small is $250,000 or less for your purchase price. That's sort of an everyman's market, where almost everybody that's working is able to go ahead and qualify for a mortgage to purchase that type of property in that range. So you're going to have, if you're buying a condo or townhouse, it could be a first-time buyer, it could be somebody starting a family, or just getting married, somebody just starting out. It could be somebody downsizing. Could be a couple of people just buying together. I mean, there's lots of family unit structures that could come together to buy that property. It's very affordable, and it's an alternative to apartment living. And I think, given the option, people would prefer something that might have more stability associated with it, and that's what I'm going to call a condo townhouse, than they would an apartment. Apartments, people are coming and going in bigger units, and it's more transient. So I think condo townhouse, given a choice, most people would choose that, and they're willing to pay a little bit more for that, especially if they're a little bit older. They maybe want things to be a little more quiet. They're not in that same party mode that they might have been in their early college days. So they might be looking for something a little bit different. Now, there isn't a big pool of condos and townhouses for rent. So again, that's why buying one makes it that much more of a good investment for you, possibly because of supply and demand. If you want to rent an apartment, go for it. They built like 10,000 units in Minneapolis. But if you want to buy a rental condo or townhouse in Minneapolis, I'm just using that for an example, you'll find that there are significantly less, like thousands and thousands less, because there aren't that many landlords out there. So you're going into a much smaller market where the demand is strong. So just something to consider. You don't want to be where everything is the same, right? You don't want to compete against hundreds and hundreds of properties if you don't have to. So that's what an apartment would be. So buying a condo townhouse is a much smaller pool. Just to digress for a moment and go back to houses. So if you're going to spend $250,000, that's not going to buy you much house, as I mentioned earlier. So it probably eliminates most of the suburbs at the time of this recording. So it's going to be very difficult for you to go into, let's say, Woodbury or Eagan or Apple Valley or Minnetonka. I'm just picking a few, Maple Grove. It's going to be hard for you to buy houses at that price range and use it as a rental. However, we can go out still today and buy condos and townhouses at that price or less. And of course, the lower that you can purchase them, the better hypothetical rate of return you might be able to achieve on that property. So buying something less expensive will improve your numbers. So again, the condo townhouse fits that bill. The other thing that you'll notice today is that they're not building condos and townhouses in the metro area, generally less than $350,000. The cost of construction based on land, labor, and material, you just can't do it as a developer and make a profit. So they have to build bigger and more expensive properties in order to continue to build. So the supply of housing that's 250 and less, in my opinion, is very static. They won't be able to add to it. There just is not a way to build it affordably unless somebody subsidizes it. So it won't be built. So what's there is there, never to be added to. Yet the population that's going to desire that type of property is only going to increase. So the millennials are just coming into their own with regards to becoming housing buyers. The average home buyer today is about 33 years old. Back when I bought my home, it was in the young 20s. So it's about 10 years older than when I first bought my property. And many of you that are watching this may be baby boomers. I'm the last baby boomer. Maybe of you may be baby boomers. And you bought a property also in your 20s. Not so much anymore with the young people. It's in their 30s. Part of that is because of the recession. And they were able to enter into the job market and get good jobs in advance later than maybe you were in your career. But the millennials are a bigger group. Now the boomers moved the housing market. The next group is the millennials. And they want to buy. They were renters for a while. They're now established in their careers. They're making life-changing decisions as what they want to do with their lives. And they're settling down a little bit and wanting to own some real estate, especially now since it's viewed as being safe again, meaning the property values are appreciating, not depreciating like they did during the recession. So as they enter in the market and there aren't enough properties, that should continue. Supply and demand imbalance continue to rise with the prices. The other thing is that the baby boomers, like myself, might have more house than we're currently using. So maybe we raised our families have, come and gone, and now it's maybe just the two of us, and we don't need X number of square feet anymore. We can get by on half of that. So a lot of the baby boomers are going to start to downsize. And the word downsize means just that, meaning go from a bigger home to a smaller home. What type of properties are they going to want? Well, probably smaller, less expensive than they're selling condos and townhouses. But we just said that market isn't being added to. So the demand is coming from both ends. It's coming from the millennials and it's coming from the baby boomers as they downsize. And how many baby boomers are there? Well, there's 10,000 of them turning 65 each day for the next 20 years. I think they peak in number in 2024, 25 is when the max number of 65-year-olds will happen. But you've got that two huge markets that are going to be wanting that same type of property, the condo or the townhouse, that's priced affordably. Sure, they could go buy a nice twin home for $350,000, $600,000, but that's more of a lateral move with regards to maybe the pricing of their existing home. So that doesn't necessarily achieve the downsize that they wanted. So that's why I think buying something 250 or less condo townhouse will put you in all of the communities really within the metro. It can be the core cities as well as the surrounding first tier and second tier suburbs. So you can pretty much go anywhere. You just have to make sure that the project allows for rentals and work with somebody that's competent that can give you the guidance and help you with the whole thing. Now, one of the things that I do is if you work with me, I walk the walk and talk the talk. So I own rental property and I have for the last 35 years. I've either owned or managed it for myself and my family. So I'm aware of what needs to be done. Many agents out there today have never owned rental property or maybe did 20 years ago. And honestly, how can they give you guidance into something that they've never done or aren't currently doing? I call that the blind leading the blind. So best of luck to you if that is the route that you decide to take. But I think you really need to work with somebody that can provide you a knowledge base that you can draw from. And I help my clients not only purchase initially, but then I'm also with them post-closing, helping them getting things set up with regards to Craigslist and some of the other marketing things and running your business the way I run mine. And then I'm always available, by a phone call to help you. I want you to buy more rental property, and preferably from me over time. So I want this to be a success and a win-win for both of us. And that's why it isn't about one sale. It's about hopefully multiple sales as you build your rental portfolio empire. And that's what I've been able to do with my client. Many of my clients is help them buy multiple properties over a span of time. The hardest one to buy is always your first one because you've never done it. You're like, oh my God, what if something goes wrong? Or I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's why pick somebody that can guide you, that is in the market on a very active basis, so that they can hold your hand and you can rely on them for information. But again, the hardest one I know will be your first. That's why start small. Start with something that's relatively inexpensive. See if you like it. See if you like dealing with tenants. See if you like dealing with associations. I think you will. After you've had success, then you want to add another and another and another, is my guess. But if you don't like it, if you're like, oh my gosh, this is too much, for the return I'm getting, I could have done better in X, Y, or Z, and I don't like it, great. Well, then we can sell it. And at least as of this recording, the market has been appreciating for a number of reasons. One being the super low interest rate environment that we're currently in, but also based on the demographics that I had mentioned to you, the supply and demand imbalance, the millennials buying and the baby boomers wanting that same product. So you have a lot of demand for a static product that doesn't exist. So hopefully this video has provided you some information. Oh, let me talk on one other thing about apartments. Apartments trade more or less like a hybrid between a stock and a bond. The buyers of apartments typically are not mom and pop, not you and me, not doing small deals. A unit in the Twin Cities goes anywhere from 80,000 to 200,000 a unit. So if you looked at a 10-unit building, that could be 800,000 to $2 million. Of course, it depends on the quality of the building and the location and the potential rents that could be generated from that building. So that's why there's a variance. But you can see that that is a much bigger purchase, even at the low end, a much bigger purchase and commitment than buying a $250,000 condo and then later, being able to sell it. So if you decided that you needed to free up that capital, let's say on that apartment building, you can't just sell off one unit. You have to sell the whole unit. Whereas if you own multiple condos or townhouses, if you have the need for other cash flow, you can sell one today and reap that reward from that particular sale and not sell the whole portfolio. And the other thing is that because right now the cap rates, and I'll go into that in a little bit later, but the capitalization of net income is called a cap rate. And the cap rate on apartments right now are very low. We're looking anywhere from, let's call it 3 to 5%. What that means is if interest rates rise in the future, you'll need to sell that building at somewhat of an equivalency to what the rates are yielding in alternative investments at that time for an apartment investor to buy. So if rates go up to 5% instead of 3%, the value of your building will go down. Excuse me. The value of your building will go down unless you're able to raise the rents. And rents are not elastic in the sense that you can just raise them. They're somewhat inelastic. And if you raise them too much, you're going to have vacancies. So again, I would not really look to apartments. I could go more in depth than that, but my guess is that you're a newer investor just starting. You might own one or a couple, might not know exactly what to do next or how to scale. And I would again encourage you to set up a time to meet with me. We can do it via Zoom meeting. We can do it over the phone. We can do it in person. And see if we can't get you on the right path. And I would love to share my knowledge with you. So with that, I'm going to end this segment, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.